Greetings, and here we are again. This is me, Ariel Cohen. Haven't been together for a while. I was traveling and just snowed under. But the global take, here we are. And of course, the topic today is what's going on between Israel and the Hamas Islamist movement in Gaza and the Israeli-Palestinian clashes. First of all, what developed there was the result of the intra-Palestinian, internal Palestinian competition, as well as, of course, bad relations between Jews and Arabs in the Middle East for the last 150 years. The internal story is like this. The Palestinian Liberation Organization, which is the West Bank, Ramallah, led by a 84-year-old Mohammed Abbas, nicknamed Abu Mazen. Abu Mazen is in failing health and has been the president of the Palestinian Autonomy for Palestinian Authority for 16 years out of the 4-year term. So he overstayed his welcome there for 4 times, but by the factor of 4. 16 years he's the president out of a 4-year term. Hamas, which is younger and more aggressive, thought that they can topple Abu Mazen in the elections that were scheduled for May 22nd. Knowing that, of course, Abu Mazen, not being an idiot, canceled the elections. But how did he do that? He decided to escalate conflicts in Jerusalem. The first conflict was in the ancient quarter of Jerusalem, called in Arabic Abu Sheikh Jarrah, and in Hebrew Shimon HaTzadik. This neighborhood was built and purchased by Jewish residents of Jerusalem, some of them with families going back hundreds of years in Jerusalem, from the second half of the 19th century, about 1870s. And then in the Israeli War of Independence of 1948, these people were ethnically cleansed by the Arabs, by the Jordanian Legion that was commanded by British officers, but it was what is Jordan today, and by the local Arab residents. Only 19 years later, in 1967, the Israelis came back, took Sheikh Jarrah, and people started trying to get the squatters out. So the Palestinians came into the Jewish homes and squatted there. And this thing, believe it or not, was going on in courts, in Israeli courts, for years, for decades. And it's still being litigated and adjudicated in the Supreme Court. The hearing was postponed because of the recent unrest, but it is a civil legal issue. And in many, many places around the world, squatters or people who refuse to pay rent adjudicate with their landlords and sometimes get evicted. So the Palestinians decided to escalate that. And the second issue is, for them, a big trigger point is the AlAqsa Mosque that is located on the Temple Mount. The Arabs always use the Al-Aqsa as a battle cry, and defend Al-Aqsa means use violence against the Jews. For example, in 1928, in Hebron, the calls to protect Al-Aqsa led to a pogrom in which hundreds of Jews were killed in that ancient city, the city where the patriarchs, the biblical patriarchs, Abram and Sarah, are buried, according to the Bible. And Hebron was ethnically cleansed of the Jews by the Arabs at that time. So scroll back to today. They started bringing stones and fireworks and firecrackers into the Al-Aqsa Mosque and go and attack the Jews who are praying next door at the Wailing Wall, at the Western Wall. and it all escalates, and the police comes and tells you're violating the COVID regulations, that too many people here, there's no social distancing. So the clashes escalate. As the clashes escalate, Hamas decides to make a move and start shooting their missiles into Israel. And an update, while the media like to say that these are locally produced small missiles, and this was true several years ago, today they're producing industrial military-grade missiles with warheads up to 200 kilos. So that's about 400 plus pounds. This is a military grade comparable with a bomb, and we saw that some of these missiles killed civilians. I believe the last count was 7 civilians in Israel, including a teenager, including a 6-year-old. So this is not a joke. And when the Israeli army started to respond, of course, the whole thing escalated very quickly, and the usual suspects, the far left, started to beat the drum about solidarity with the Palestinians, when in fact, Hamas was the one who started shooting rockets into Israel. And in 3 or 4 days, over 1,000 rockets were launched, and Israel is 30 times smaller than the United States by population of close to 10 million. The United States population is 330 million. So imagine if 30,000 rockets were shot at New York and Los Angeles and Chicago from Canada and Mexico. What kind of a reaction would you expect? If Belgium was shooting rockets into France, what kind of a reaction the French government would have undertaken? If the Irish were shooting missiles into London, what kind of reaction? So the Israeli response, as President Biden mentioned, was proportionate. It was targeted. The Israelis were not deliberately targeting civilians, which is a war crime, as Hamas did. What happened was, and that's why the tragic civilian casualties happened on both sides. I mean, it happened in Israel because they're targeting the civilians. It happened in Gaza because Israelis are targeting military targets that Hamas is deliberately locating in civilian areas, in schools, in mosques, in hospitals. And they've been doing it for decades. For 15 years, this conflict with Hamas is going on since 2006. And just last night, I'm talking on a Friday, just last night, the Israeli military apparently did the following trick to Hamas. They announced a ground invasion. They brought tanks and artillery to the border, made a lot of noise there, and Hamas gave an order for all their soldiers to rush into what they call Gaza Metro, the underground tunnels they use as the logistical network to move rockets and to move people and whatnot. Israel had 160 airplanes up in the air, and they hid the tunnels with Hamas fighters in them, away from civilian population, away from the women and children. And we don't have the damage report yet, but with 450 ground penetrating bombs released, I assume that Hamas lost probably close to 1,000 fighters, a severe blow. And now Hamas is already signaling to the Russians and the Egyptians that they are ready for ceasefire. Well, Israel is not. Israel did not start this war. Israel is about to finish this war on the terms the Israelis will decide are appropriate. Having said that, Israel made mistakes clearly. Number one, they underestimated the power of Hamas to manufacture these munitions. Today, you can bring a machine and feed the specs to the micron, and the machine will manufacture the body of the rocket or the cone, the nose cone, where you put the explosives in. So their industrial capacity jumped up tremendously. number one. Number two, there were clashes inside Israel for the first time in decades. And that means that both Hamas and PA, Palestinian Authority, is inciting the Israeli Arab population. They have a network there, and the Shin Bet, the hallowed Israeli security service, apparently was not paying enough attention, or the police was not paying enough attention. This needs to change for the security and safety of the Arab citizens of Israel and the Jewish citizens of Israel. The incitement, the organizing, the attacks, the lynchings, there were some lynchings of Arabs, of Jews by Arabs and vice versa. The lynchings need to stop. And one last thing, the Israelis who randomly attack Arabs should be prosecuted, should be identified and prosecuted. Only the rule of law can provide the future for Jewish and Arab citizens of Israel. And the Arabs know, and I talk to Israeli Arabs a lot, they know that their condition, their life is better than either in Gaza or in the West Bank or in many Arab countries that do not have the rule of law. So the lessons from this is, do not underestimate the enemy, hit them hard after they attack them so that they won't want to do it again for many, many years. Like in 2006, we saw there was, at the time, it looked like an inconclusive war in Lebanon, but Hezbollah and Iran were deterred enough not to start again, at least until now. And I hope, fingers crossed, that they won't do it again. And work to identify the violent extremists and networks inside Israel while giving protection to all citizens, Arabs and Jews. This is a lot to digest. Thank you for being with us. And please subscribe to this channel on YouTube and follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. All the best. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to get more content like this.